Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are opening up a file that is, well, it's just a massive paradox wrapped in a military uniform.
That's a great way to put it.
We're talking about a man who, ruled the most populous nation on Earth for decades, then technically lost it.
And then spent the rest of his life on this small island absolutely insisting, that he was still the boss of the whole thing.
It's a story that just, it completely defies any easy categorization.
It really does. We're looking at the life, the crimes, and the surprisingly enduring legacy of Chiang Kai-shek.
And when I say paradox, I mean it starts right at the beginning with his name. We all call him Chiang Kai-shek. That's the name in all the history books.
That's right.
But if he walked into a room in his home province and you shouted, Chiang Kai-shek, he might not even turn around.
He probably wouldn't. It's a Cantonese romanization, but the man didn't speak a word of Cantonese.
So wait, the name the entire world knows him by is from a dialect he didn't even speak.
Exactly. He was a Wu speaker from Zhejiang province. So the name itself is kind of a historical accident, a mispronunciation that's stuck.
That's incredible. It's like the identity confusion is baked in from the very start.
It goes all the way down. To his family, he was Jiang Ruiyuan. That was his milk name.
Yeah.
Basically his baby name.
What does that mean?
It means auspicious beginning, which is quite something. Then later, when he went to school, he took on a school name, Purity of Aspirations.
Purity of aspirations. That is setting a very high bar for yourself.
It is. But to history, to the West, he's the Generalissimo. And so the mission for this deep dive is to figure out how a kid from a salt merchant family, a kid his own relatives called a naughty child, ended up becoming the face of China for half a century.
And we're going to unpack all of it. The warlord era, the alliance with the Shanghai underworld, the massive gold heist, and the strange, complicated reality of modern Taiwan.
It's a huge story.
We've got a massive stack of sources today. Biographies, recently opened military records, and even his own personal diaries, which are really revealing.
Oh, they're fascinating.
So I want to start with that naughty child label, because usually when we talk about major historical figures, dictators or great leaders, the backstory is either humble peasant or aristocratic princeling. Chiang was a salt merchant's kid.
He was. Born in 1887 in Shiku in Zhejiang province. Now, you hear salt merchant, and you might think it's a small-time thing.
Right, selling table salt.
But in the late Qing dynasty, salt was a state monopoly. So being a licensed salt merchant meant his family had money, they had status, they had connections.
Okay, so they were comfortable.
Very. But, and this is a huge betting, his father died when Chiang was only 8 years old.
And that changes everything. The protector of the family is gone.
Completely gone. And you have to imagine 19th century China, a widow and a young son with a known family business, they were targets.
For who? Relative.
Unscrupulous relatives, local officials, everyone tried to swindle them out of their inheritance. So Choyan grew up watching his mother, this formidable woman, just fight tooth and nail to hold the family together.
And he idolized her for it.
Totally. He wrote about her constantly in his diaries. He called her the embodiment of Confucian virtues.
Let's pause on that phrase, Confucian virtues. We hear it all the time with China. What did that actually mean to a kid growing up in the 1890s?
It meant a world of rigid hierarchy. It meant duty. It meant ritual. It was about knowing your place in the family and society and sacrificing your own desires for the good of the collective.
And his mother was the enforcer of that.
She was incredibly tough, deeply pious. And she instilled in him this idea that he had a burden to carry, that it was his job to restore the family's honor and standing.
But the sources say he wasn't exactly a model student of Confucianism.
Oh, far from it. He's described as temperamental, difficult, quick to get into fights. He was a rebel. But as he hit his late teens, that rebellious energy started to find a focus, a target.
The Qing dynasty.
Exactly. He looked around and saw this ancient empire just crumbling.
This is the height of the century of humiliation. Foreign powers are carving up the Chinese coast like a melon. The emperor is powerless.
And he realizes that being a merchant isn't going to save China.
He realizes that the old ways are dead. He decides the only answer is power, military power. So he decides to become a soldier. And in 1906, he does something that, to us, it sounds like just getting a haircut.
But at the time, it was basically an act of treason.
It was a revolutionary act. He cuts off his queue.
The queue, that's the long braided ponytail with the shaved forehead.
Yes, and it was mandatory for all Han Chinese men. It was the symbol of submission to the ruling Manchu Qing dynasty. If you were caught without one, you were an outlaw, a rebel.
And he cuts his off, and then what?
He mails it home to his family.
He mailed it home. That is an incredibly dramatic gesture. That's like burning your draft card and mailing the ashes to your mom. It was a massive shock to his community. It was his way of saying, I am done. I am severing my tie to this rotten past. And right after that, he leaves for Japan.
This is another one of those great ironies, isn't it? He wants to save China from foreign imperialism, so he goes to Japan, the rising imperial power in Asia.
Well, it makes a certain kind of sense if you look at the world from his perspective in 1906. Japan was the only non-Western country that had successfully modernized its military and its industry.
They had just beaten a major European power.
Exactly. They'd beaten Russia in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. For a young, angry, Chinese nationalist like Chiang, Japan wasn't the enemy yet. It was the classroom. It was the proof of concept. If they could do it, why couldn't China?
So he enrolls in a military academy there, and he even serves in the Imperial Japanese Army for a while.
He did. He wore the uniform of the 13th Field Artillery Regiment. He learned the drills, the discipline. And this period is absolutely crucial for understanding his entire psychology.
There is a story he loved to tell from this time, isn't there?
The spitting story. It's so revealing.
Tell us.
He's on a boat, and a fellow Chinese student on the boat spits on the deck. A Japanese sailor sees it and comes over and just scolds the student mercilessly. He says something like, Japanese people don't spit on the floor. We use a handkerchief. That is why our country is strong and your country is weak.
Wow. That is a stinging rebuke.
And it just burned itself into Chiang's brain. For the rest of his life, he conflated public hygiene and personal discipline with national strength.
So while his classmates are out drinking or partying, Chiang is.
He's in his room, sitting perfectly straight at his desk. He's eating these simple ascetic meals of rice, salted fish, and pickled plums. He's reading about Bushido, the way of the warrior. He was trying to forge himself into a weapon for China's salvation.
So he's building this rigid, almost monastic shell around himself. But then 1911 hits. The Xinhai Revolution.
The dam breaks. The Qing dynasty collapses. And Chiang immediately deserts his post in the Japanese army and rushes back to China to fight. And where does he end up? Shanghai.
Shanghai in the 1910s and 20s, which was, I mean, it's hard to even describe. The Paris of the East, the whore of Asia.
It was a city of absolute glittering contrasts. Unbelievable wealth and glamour right next to the most desperate poverty. And it was run not by the government, but in large part by the Green Gang.
The Green Gang.
Yeah.
You really need to dig into this because gang makes them sound like, common street thugs. There is so much more than that, right?
So much more. Think of them as a combination of the mafia, a massive labor union, and a secret police force all rolled into one. They controlled everything.
Like what?
The opium trade, which was enormous, the gambling dens, the prostitution rings, but also the docks, the rickshaw pullers, the factory labor. If you wanted to do anything in Shanghai, you had to go through them. Their leader was a man named Du Yusheng, big-eared Du.
And Chiang Kai-shek, the man of purity of aspirations, Confucian virtue. He gets involved with these guys.
Involved. He was practically one of them. The evidence is pretty strong that he was an initiated member. During his early years in Shanghai, he wasn't just a soldier. He was a stock market speculator, a bit of a hustler, a fixer.
The sources mention he was actually charged with felonies?
He was. Armed robbery, extortion. There are actual police records.
Wait, the future president of China was charged with armed robbery? How did he get out of that?
He never served a day in jail. The Green Gang had judges, police captains, everyone on the payroll. This is that gritty reality we mentioned. Chiang learned very early on that power doesn't just come from the barrel of a gun or from military parades.
It comes from leverage, from the shadows.
From money, from favors, from violence in the shadows. And this connection to the underworld, it never really goes away. It becomes a tool, a weapon that he uses with devastating effect later on.
So while he's navigating this criminal underworld, he's also trying to climb the political ladder of the new republic. He attaches himself to Sun Yat-sen.
The father of the nation.
Right, but Sun had tons of followers, tons of would-be lieutenants. How does Chiang make himself stand out from the crowd?
By proving his loyalty under fire, literally. In 1922, one of Sun Yat-sen's allied warlords turns on him in Guangzhou. It's a mutiny. Sun has to flee to a gunboat, the Yongfeng.
And it's a desperate situation.
Completely desperate. They're basically trapped on this river, under constant shelling. Most of Sun's followers fled for their lives. But Chiang heard what was happening, and he raced to the boat.
I read accounts of this. It sounds just miserable. The sweltering summer heat, mosquitoes everywhere, constant fear of a direct hit.
And for over 50 days, Chiang was by Sun's side. He wasn't just a bodyguard. He was mopping the decks, he was organizing the defense, he was writing memos. He stood right next to Sun, while artillery shells were splashing in the water around them.
That builds a bond.
An unbreakable bond. After
Right.
that, Sun decided, this is the man I can trust. This is my military heir.
And because of that trust, Sun gives him this huge, pivotal assignment. In 1923, he sends him to Moscow. And this is where that bizarre red general label comes from.
It's another paradox. At this time, the Soviet Union was the only major power willing to help the Chinese revolutionaries. The West America, Britain, they were happy with the status quo of a weak, divided China they could exploit.
So Sun's party, the Kuomintang or KMT, makes an alliance of convenience with the Soviets.
And with the fledgling Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah.
So Chiang goes to Moscow for several months to study their military system, their political organization. He meets Trotsky.
But he comes back
Yeah.
not exactly a convert.
He comes back deeply skeptical. He writes in his diary that he found the whole Soviet system to be based on terror and oppression. He especially hated the ideology of class struggle.
Because it's the opposite of Confucian harmony.
Exactly. To Chiang, that was poison for China. He believed in social harmony, not class war. But this is the critical insight he had. He loved their organization.
Explain that distinction. What did he see that he liked?
He saw how the Communist Party was structured. It was a pyramid, a strict hierarchy, terrifying discipline. He saw the role of political commissars who watched over the military commanders to ensure loyalty. He saw this concept of democratic centralism, which is basically just top-down control.
So he thought, I don't want their communism, but I absolutely want their machine.
That's it perfectly.
Yeah.
He decided to rebuild the KMT not as a loose collection of intellectuals, but on a Leninist structure. He wanted to create a party army.
Which is fascinating. The great anti-communist party of China was built using the communist blueprint.
100%.
Yeah.
And his first project was founding the Whampoa Military Academy. It was built with Soviet money, Soviet advisors, and Soviet guns. He became the commandant.
And one of his top political instructors was a young man named Zhu Enlai.
Who would later become Mao's premier. They all worked together. But Whampoa was Chiang's key to power. It allowed him to build a new officer corps, young men who were loyal not just to the state, but personally loyal to him, their teacher. This was his power base.
So Sun Yat-sen dies in 1925. Chiang, through a series of shrewd maneuvers, positions himself as the leader. And in 1926, he feels strong enough to launch the Northern Expedition.
The great campaign to finally unify China and crush the northern warlords.
He's incredibly successful at first. He's sweeping north. But he has this nagging problem. He's still stuck in this united front with the Chinese communists who are growing in power.
And he decides in 1927 that the alliance is over. And this brings us to one of the darkest chapters in his life, the Shanghai Massacre.
And this is where his old friends, the Green Gang, come back into the picture.
They come back with a vengeance. So Chiang's army approaches Shanghai. The city has actually been liberated from the local warlord, not by Chiang's army, but by a massive uprising organized by the communist-led labor unions.
So they welcome Chiang as a hero, as an ally.
They do. They think he's there to consolidate the revolution. But Chiang sees their power, their control of the workers, as a direct threat to his authority. So he makes a secret deal with Big Ear Du and the other Green Gang leaders.
He outsources the dirty work.
He does. On the morning of April 12, 1927, hundreds of gangsters, dressed in blue denim with white armbands to identify each other, armed with axes, meat cleavers, and Mauser pistols, swarmed out of the safety of the international concessions.
And what did they do?
They attacked the Union headquarters. They attacked the picket lines. They hunted down known communists in the streets. It was an absolute slaughter.
And when the workers tried to protest this, when they marched on the military headquarters,
Chiang's troops, the very army they thought was their liberator, opened fire with machine guns. We don't know the exact number, but thousands were killed in a matter of days.
this was the point of no return. It shattered the United Front.
It did. It drove the communists underground and out of the cities. It's what ultimately led them to the countryside and to the Long March. It's the official start of the Chinese Civil War.
And this begins what's known as the White Terror. And there's that infamous quote attributed to him from this period.
It's chilling. I would rather mistakenly kill 1,000 innocent people than allow one single communist to escape.
That just. It shows the absolute ruthlessness of his worldview. Order was the ultimate goal. Dissent was a cancer. And to establish order, he was willing to amputate entire limbs of the body politic.
No price was too high.
But at the very same time he's conducting this brutal purge, he's also doing a massive personal rebrand. He marries Su Meiling.
Madam Chiang. And this wasn't just a romance, it was a merger, a corporate merger of political and financial power.
The Sum family was one of the four big families that basically ran China's economy.
They were incredibly powerful, American-educated, fabulously wealthy, and Christian. By marrying Meiling, Chiang gained a direct line to Western finance and, crucially, to American political support. She became his face to the world.
And he converts to Christianity to marry her. Do we have any sense if that was a genuine conversion or just a political move?
Well, people were very cynical at the time. They called it his Christianity for cash. But if you look at his private diaries, which he never intended for publication, he read the Bible every single day for the rest of his life.
Really?
He would copy out verses. He genuinely seemed to see himself as a sort of Methodist Confucian crusader, chosen by God to save China from atheistic communism. The faith seems to have become sincere over time.
So now we enter the Nanjing decade, from 1928 to 1937. On paper, Chiang is the undisputed ruler of a unified China. He's the Generalissimo. And he's trying to modernize the country. What did that actually look like on the ground?
It was a time of intense contradictions. On one hand, there was real progress. He built thousands of miles of roads and railways. He built hospitals and schools. He reformed the banking system and created a stable national currency for the first time in decades.
And I read he actually did a lot for women's legal rights compared to the old imperial system.
He did. His government formally banned foot binding. They passed laws allowing women to sue for divorce, to inherit property. But politically, it was incredibly stifling.
This is when he launches the New Life movement, which, reading about it now, feels so incredibly petty for a national leader.
It was bizarre. It was a government campaign to micromanage the personal habits of 400 million people.
Like what? What were the rules?
Don't spit in public. Button your collar correctly. Sit up straight. Don't eat noisily. Be on time. It was an attempt to militarize the entire civilian population.
It sounds like a boarding school headmaster trying to run a country.
That's a great analogy. He sincerely believed that if people just buttoned their collars properly, they would develop the discipline necessary to fight Japan. But of course, it was enforced by his secret police, the Blue Shirt Society.
And this is where we have to bring up the F word. Fascism.
You can't avoid it. In the 1930s, Chiang looked at the world, and what did he see? He saw the liberal democracies of the West failing during the Great Depression. And he saw the fascist nations, Mussolini's Italy, Hitler's Germany rising. They looked dynamic and strong.
And he wanted to copy them.
He was very open about it. He invited Nazi military advisors like Alexander von Falkenhausen to retrain his army. He bought German weapons. He once described fascism as a stimulant that could revive a declining society like China.
So he's trying to build this weird hybrid, this sort of Confucian fascist state. But all the while, he has this massive distraction. Japan.
A huge one.
Japan invades Manchuria in 1931. A huge chunk of Chinese territory is just taken, and Chiang's response is to not really fight back.
This becomes the single most controversial policy of his entire life. His official strategy was internal pacification first, external resistance second.
Can you explain the logic there? Because on the surface, it sounds insane. Your country is being invaded. Why are you spending your best troops fighting your own people?
He used a medical metaphor. He said the Japanese were a disease of the skin, painful, ugly, but not necessarily fatal to the body politic, but the communists. They were a disease of the heart.
An existential threat.
He believed that if he went to war with Japan while the communists were still active, they would just stab him in the back. They'd use the chaos of the war to expand their own power. His plan was to wipe out Mao's forces first, consolidate his own power, and then turn the full, unified strength of the Chinese army against Japan.
But the Chinese public, the students, the intellectuals, they hated this. They saw it as cowardice.
They were furious. There were massive student protests. It was deeply, deeply unpopular. And this tension just builds and builds until December 1936, when it explodes in the Xi'an incident. And frankly, this whole episode plays out like a Hollywood thriller.
Set the scene for us.
Okay, it's December 1936. Chiang flies to the city of Xi'an. Why? To personally chew out his generals and order them to stop dragging their feet and launch a final annihilation campaign against the communists who are holed up nearby.
And one of those generals is Zhang Shuiliang, the young marshal.
Yes. And the key thing to know about the young marshal is that his home province was Manchuria, the very territory the Japanese had stolen. His men wanted to fight Japan to reclaim their homes, not kill other Chinese.
So Chiang is there. He's staying in a hot springs resort at the foot of a mountain.
Right. And at dawn, on December 12th, the young marshal's troops storm the complex. A huge firefight erupts. Chiang's elite bodyguards are cut down. Chiang is woken by the gunfire, realizes he's under attack, and climbs out a back window.
In his pajamas.
In his nightshirt. No shoes. He scales a 10-foot wall, falls into a freezing ditch on the other side, injures his back badly, and loses his false teeth.
So the leader of China is now toothless, in his pajamas, shivering in a ditch.
He manages to scramble halfway up the freezing mountainside and hides in a damp cave. That's where the young marshal's soldiers find him a few hours later, shivering and in shock.
What happens when they find him?
His first words are, "If you are my subordinate, shoot me and put me out of my misery. If you're a rebel, kill me now." He expected to be executed. But the captain in charge salutes and says, "We are not rebels. We just want you to lead us against Japan."
It's not a coup. It's a kidnapping, but it's an intervention.
It's exactly that. They take him prisoner. They hold him for 2 weeks. It's an incredibly tense international incident. And in a bizarre twist, Zhou Enlai, the communist number 2, actually flies into Xi'an to help negotiate his release.
The man he'd been trying to kill for a decade.
The very same. In the end, Chiang was too proud to sign any formal agreement, but a verbal understanding was reached. He agreed. The Civil War would stop, the KMT and the Communists would form a second united front to fight Japan together.
And just in time. Because 6 months later, in July 1937, Japan launches its full-scale invasion of China proper.
And this begins 8 years of absolute unimaginable hell, World War II in China. And here we have to talk about some of the decisions Chiang makes as a military leader.
Yeah.
Because some of them are. They're ethically impossible to justify.
You're talking about the Yellow River flood.
June 1938. The Japanese army is advancing rapidly across the North China Plain, heading towards the strategic city of Wuhan. Chiang's armies are in full retreat. He needs to do something, anything, to stop them.
So he uses nature as a weapon.
He orders his generals to blow up the dikes, holding back the Yellow River.
This is the river known as the cradle of Chinese civilization.
Yes, and he turned it into a weapon of mass destruction. The water just poured out, creating a massive new floodplain, changing the course of the river for years. It did stop the Japanese advance for a few months, but it bought him time.
But at what cost? What about the people living in those areas?
There was no warning. He couldn't warn his own people, because if he did, the Japanese would know the plan. The floodwaters swept through thousands of villages. The official estimate is that it killed somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million Chinese civilians.
1 million of his own people.
Drowned, starved to death of the famine that followed, or died of disease. Another 4 million were made homeless.
That's a staggering number.
And you have to think about the political fallout. It completely eroded the trust of the peasantry in the nationalist government. If your own government is willing to drown you to save itself, why on earth would you support it? This was a massive propaganda gift to the communists later on.
But internationally, at least for a while, Chiang is presented as this great hero of the resistance. He's at the Cairo Conference in 1943 with Roosevelt and Churchill. He's one of the big four Allied leaders.
The image management was incredible, and a lot of that was thanks to his wife, Madame Chiang. She spoke perfect English, she was charming, she captivated the American public. But behind the scenes, the relationship with the U.S. was absolutely toxic.
You mean with the American military command in China?
Specifically with General Joseph Stilwell, the American commander in the China-Burma-India theater. Stilwell absolutely loathed Chiang. He called him Peanut in his private diaries.
Peanut. That's not exactly a term of respect for an Allied leader.
Stillwell was convinced that Chiang was incompetent, that he was hoarding the best U.S. weapons not to fight the Japanese now, but to save them for fighting the communists later, after the war was over.
Was he right?
He wasn't entirely wrong. And on top of that, the corruption in Chiang's government was just staggering.
President Truman had some very choice words about this after the war.
Truman was absolutely furious about it. There's a famous quote where he said, "They're thieves, every damn one of them." He claimed that the Soon family and other KMT elites had stolen $750 million in U.S. aid.
That's a huge amount of money back then.
A colossal sum. And Truman claimed it was invested in real estate down in Sao Paulo and, as he put it, some right here in New York. While Chinese soldiers were literally starving to death at the front, KMT officials were buying apartments in Manhattan.
So fast forward, 1945 comes, Japan surrenders. on paper, Chiang is the victor. He's the leader of a victorious allied power. He has the biggest army. He has U.S. support. He controls all the major cities.
He has every advantage.
But 4 years later, by 1949, his regime has completely crumbled, and he is fleeing for his life to Taiwan. How does a man with every single advantage lose so spectacularly?
Well, the classic political line is, it's the economy, stupid. And in this case, it really was. The 8-year war had destroyed the Chinese economy, but the KMT's mismanagement in the years after finished it off. To pay for the ongoing civil war against the communists, they just printed money. Endlessly.
Which leads to hyperinflation.
Some of the worst hyperinflation in modern history. We've all seen the famous photographs from that time, people pushing wheelbarrows full of worthless cash just to buy a single bag of rice.
And that destroys your base of support.
It completely wiped out the middle class. Teachers, civil servants, small business owners, the very people who should have been Chiang's most loyal supporters, saw their life savings turn to dust in a matter of weeks. They turned on him. The mandate of heaven was lost.
And what about on the battlefield? He was a trained general. Why were his armies failing?
He was a terrible field commander. He was a micromanager. He would sit in his headquarters in Nanjing and try to direct battalion-level movements 1,000 miles away by radio, completely ignoring the advice of his generals who were actually on the ground.
And he had this obsession with cities.
A fatal obsession. He was fixated on holding onto major cities, points on a map, as his critics called them. Meanwhile, the communists under Mao focused on controlling the countryside, winning over the peasants, and cutting the supply lines to the cities. They would just surround a KMT-held city and starve the garrison into surrendering.
There's also the intelligence factor. We talked about his secret police. But by the late 40s, his intelligence network had basically collapsed.
It had. Yeah. His infamous spy master, Dai Lai, arguably the most feared man in China, the head of the secret police, died in a mysterious plane crash in 1946. Without him, the KMT was flying blind.
And the communists.
The communists, on the other hand, had infiltrated everything. Chiang's own assistant chief of staff was a communist agent. His Ministry of Defense was riddled with spies. Mao often knew Chiang's battle plans before Chiang's own generals did.
So the walls are just closing in from every direction. It's 1949. Chiang finally realizes the mainland is lost. But he has one last audacious card to play. The Great Retreat.
And this isn't just an evacuation of people, it's a heist.
It's one of the greatest transfers of wealth in modern history, isn't it?
It's incredible. Chiang decides he's going to turn the island of Taiwan into his fortress, his government in exile. But to do that, he needs capital. So he gives a secret order to systematically empty the vaults of the Bank of China.
He took the gold.
All of it. Gold bars, silver bullion, U.S. dollar reserves. He used the Chinese Navy and disguised commercial shipments to move almost the entire hard currency reserve of the nation of China across the strait to Taipei.
Which left the incoming communist government with what?
A bankrupt country and a completely worthless currency. It was a final, devastating economic blow to Mao. But he didn't just take the money.
He took the art.
He took the treasures, the absolute finest pieces from the National Palace Museum, thousands of years of Chinese history, the best imperial jade, the rarest porcelain, the most famous paintings from the Forbidden City. All of it was crated up and shipped to Taiwan.
So he arrives on this island, and this begins the strange final act of his life. For the next 25 years, from 1950 until his death in 1975, he rules Taiwan. But he doesn't rule it like a defeated general. He rules it like an emperor in exile.
He sets up a brutal, efficient police state. He immediately declares martial law, which would end up lasting for 38 years, one of the longest periods of martial law in modern history.
This is the White Terror of Taiwan.
A different white terror from the one on the mainland.
We need to describe what that actually felt like for people there. Imagine you're a local Taiwanese person. Your island has been a Japanese colony for 50 years. Suddenly, these 2 million mainlanders show up, their troops take over, they don't speak your language, and they start arresting people in the middle of the night.
It was terrifying. If you were heard criticizing the government, if you were caught reading the wrong book, if you listened to a radio broadcast from the mainland, you could disappear. An estimated 140,000 people were imprisoned. Thousands were executed.
And he specifically targeted the local elite.
Right. Yes. The local Taiwanese elite, the lawyers, the doctors, the intellectuals who had emerged under Japanese rule were systematically targeted. Chiang didn't trust them. He saw them as potential fifth columnists.
But, and here is the maddening central paradox of Chiang Kai-shek. At the exact same time he is running this brutal police state, He oversees an economic miracle.
This is what political scientists and economists still study to this day. It's fascinating. Chiang had learned a bitter lesson. He realized that corruption and, crucially, land inequality had lost him the mainland. He was not going to make the same mistake twice.
So in Taiwan, he launches a massive land reform program.
The very thing he had refused to do on the mainland.
Why the change of heart?
Because on the mainland, his power base was the big landlords. They were his friends, his generals, his financial backers. He couldn't take their land. But in Taiwan, he didn't know these landlords. He didn't owe them a thing. They were just locals.
That is a cynical but politically brilliant insight. He had the outsider's advantage.
Exactly. He could be ruthless for what he saw as the greater good, because he had no personal ties to the old elite. He forced the landlords to sell their excess land to the government at a fixed price, and then the government sold it on easy credit terms to the tenant farmers.
And that transformed the society.
It created a new, prosperous society of small, independent landholders. It massively boosted agricultural productivity, and by compensating the old landlords with shares in new industries, it freed up capital to fuel Taiwan's industrialization.
And he empowered the technocrats.
He put American-trained engineers and economists in charge of the economy and, crucially, protected them from political interference. This laid the foundation for the Taiwan miracle, for the Asian tiger economy. Taiwan went from a poor agricultural backwater to a global high-tech powerhouse in a single generation.
But the whole time, he's not publicly admitting that Taiwan is his new home. He's still planning Project National Glory.
The obsession. The dream of retaking the mainland. It bordered on delusion. He maintained a massive military, at one point over 600,000 men, for a tiny island of a few million people.
They were constantly drawing up invasion plans.
Constantly. He was funding guerrilla armies, remnants of his KMT forces, in the jungles of Burma and Tibet well into the 1960s. He even supported Muslim insurgencies in Western China. He never, ever gave up the idea that he would one day return in triumph.
Did the United States, his main backer, take any of this seriously?
The U.S. played a delicate double game. After the Korean War started, they needed Chiang. They saw Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the fight against global communism. It poured in aid, but they absolutely did not want him starting World War III by actually invading the mainland.
So they held his leash.
They kept him as a chained tiger. Every time Chiang would say, "I'm ready, let's go," the Americans would find a reason to say, "No, not today, Generalissimo."
So let's talk about his legacy today, because it is actively shifting under our feet. In Taiwan, how is he remembered?
It is incredibly divisive. Taiwan is now a vibrant, noisy democracy. And for the younger generation and for the families of the victims of the White Terror, Chiang is seen as a colonizer and a murderer.
You see that with the statues.
Exactly. You see his statues being pulled down or defaced with red paint. There's even a park where hundreds of these rejected statues from all over the island have been gathered together in this weird, surreal garden of the Generalissimos.
But on the mainland, in communist China, the script is completely flipped.
This is the most fascinating twist of all. For decades, the official communist line was that he was the bandit Chiang, a running dog of American imperialism. But in recent years, Beijing has softened its view considerably.
Why?
They started to emphasize his role as a nationalist. They praise him for fighting Japan. But most importantly, they like that he always insisted that there was only one China and that Taiwan was a part of it.
So his ghost is now a useful ally for Beijing against the modern Taiwanese independence movement.
Precisely. The communists and their old enemies in the KMT eventually found common ground. They both believe Taiwan belongs to the mainland.
I want to end with a comparison. The historian Rana Mitter has this really provocative thought about Chiang and Mao. He says that if you look at modern China today, hyper-capitalist, powerful authoritarian, obsessed with national glory and stability, it doesn't really look like Mao's vision at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Mao wanted permanent revolution. He wanted to smash the state. He hated bureaucracy and tradition.
At Chiang.
Chiang's vision was order, a strong, centralized state guiding a market economy. It was about blending traditional Confucian values with modern technology and military discipline. If Chiang Kai-shek's ghost could wander around Shanghai or Beijing today, he would probably nod and say, yes, this is basically what I was trying to build.
So Chiang lost the Civil War, but his philosophy, his model for China actually won the 21st century.
In a strange, deeply ironic way, you could absolutely make that argument. The model that rules China today is essentially the model Chiang piloted during the Nanjing decade, just flying under a red flag instead of a blue one.
That is a heavy thought to leave people on. So one final what if for you and for our listeners. In 1946, the U.S. sent General George Marshall to China to try and broker a peace deal, a coalition government between Chiang's nationalists and Mao's communists.
The Marshall Mission. A last-ditch effort to avoid all-out civil war.
What if it had worked?
It's the biggest what-if of the entire Cold War. If they had managed to form a coalition government, even a dysfunctional one, there's probably no Korean War, there's probably no Vietnam War. The Soviet Union is contained much earlier and differently. The last 70 years of global history would look completely unrecognizably different.
But instead, the talks failed, the armies marched, the dams broke, and the gold went to Taiwan.
And we are all living in the world that failure created.
We're going to leave it there. A naughty child, a gangster's ally, a toothless captive in a cave, a brutal dictator, and an unlikely economic architect. Chiang Kai-shek, the man who lost China and in the process invented modern Taiwan.
A complicated legacy for an even more complicated world.
Thanks for diving deep with us. If you like this, share it with someone who thinks history is just a boring list of dates. We'll see you next time.